Well, I finished my degree at Columbia in 1976,
Right,
and I decided to look for a job in the rehabilitation counseling field.
right.
And to my dismay, no one would hire me.
No.
I looked for a job for a year, sent out more than 200 resumes. And John, you have to understand, in America, I had 2 degrees from Cornell and 1 from Columbia, 3 degrees from very prestigious Ivy League schools, 2 master's degrees, and everybody still felt I was too disabled to work.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, they say, okay, we know where Canada is. In British Columbia on the West Coast, right? Right. And then in the West Coast, we have this big city called Vancouver. Well, we are 500 miles north of Vancouver, or for our European friends, 800 kilometers. And Prince George, smaller community, about 80,000 people, 120,000 in the region. It is being in harmony with nature. We have everything that you can think of here: black bears, grizzly bears, caribou, deer, foxes, you name it, we have them all. So today we have a very, very interesting guest. His name is Kenneth Kunken. Do I say that correct, Kenneth? Kunken?
Yes,
Yes.
Kunken, and that sounds great. Mhm.
And Kenneth is has an interesting background. He years ago was in football, and he in that exercise broke his neck and got paralyzed from the neck down, and then spent a lot of time in hospital recovering. Went back to university, got a degree in engineering, and earned a Master's of Arts degree as well from Cornell, a Master's of Education degree of Columbia University in psychology. Ken, under the circumstances, you have had an amazing life considering all the things. So tell us about that, making the most out of very, very bad situations. How did you do it, or what made you do it? What gave you the power and the ability to take this being paralyzed and turn it into the success story that it became?
John, I basically have to give a lot of credit to my family and my friends for all of their help and support, because without that, I wouldn't have been able to have done anything that I eventually did. I'm paralyzed over most of my body. I have a little bit of movement in my left arm, but nothing in my fingers or wrist. So I need help doing virtually everything. And my family has been so supportive over the years. They basically assured me that they'd act as my arms and legs to make sure I could do everything I wanted to do it,
Now, that being said, Ken, I saw your wife peekaboo around the corner before we started a little bit.
right?
So introduce us to your wife. And then the other
Okay.
thing that I want you to talk about, you also have triplets, boys, and I want you to tell us a little bit about that. Start with your wife.
Okay. My wife, Anna, is sitting just off to my right. Anna, do you want to please come on camera for a minute?
Anna,
It's my
there you
wife,
are.
Anna. Right? And Anna is from Poland. We actually met in, I think it was 1999. And fortunately, our relationship developed where we were married in 2003. And when we got married, Anna said she'd like to have my baby. Now, at that time, I had been paralyzed for more than 30 years, and I was already in my 50s. But we were fortunate that we pursued in vitro fertilization. And through the miracle of science, Anna became pregnant. And in 2005, I was present in the delivery room when Anna gave birth to triplet boys.
She just didn't become pregnant. You
Right.
developed a team.
We sure did. We decided let's do it all at once. So my
Yeah,
boys are going to turn 20 in a little over a week,
yeah.
and they're all sophomores at three separate colleges in upstate New York.
Give us their names.
Okay. Joseph, James, and Timothy.
Okay, tell us
And
what
they're
they
all
do
in
and where
high
are they?
school. Well, James is a sophomore at the State University of New York at Morrisville, where
Okay,
he's studying renewable energy.
okay.
Timothy is a sophomore at Syracuse University, where many of my relatives went, and he's pursuing a dual major, communications in the Newhouse School of Communications at Syracuse, and public advocacy and public policy up in Syracuse as well in the Maxwell School. My son Joseph is actually a sophomore at Cornell University, my alma mater, where he's now pursuing mechanical engineering. All three of them are also martial artists. They're all second degree black belts in the martial art Taekwondo. They're very close with each other, and they're just terrific kids.
Amazing, Ken. Now, this happened to you in 1970, and you were playing football for Cornell. And so, did it happen? And just because it has been in the news a lot, I watch it. The football. I was born in Holland, so I'm kind of a soccer individual. But I've been in Canada for 60 years, so I'm and watch and as you well know, Canada U.S. very very close. We watch each other's television, and obviously I've been watching football, and it's a very it can be very hard, and especially with the kickoffs that so tell us about what happened when then, other than we know that already, but your reflection back on it and what has been in the news, and trying to even eliminating, correct me if I'm wrong, the kickoff and the scramble that follows, or making it less subject to danger or getting hurt. Tell us a little bit about
Right?
reflecting back.
Okay.
What has happened since? Obviously, it's on your mind.
Right. Well, in professional football, they've now changed the rules on kickoffs, where before, the kickoff team would basically be running full speed down the field to try and tackle the ball carrier. And as a result, there was so much pent up energy in running that far, that fast, that the kickoff is the most dangerous play in football and has been for many years. So the National Football League has tried to lessen the degree of danger by changing those rules. And when I was playing on Cornell had a special sport called lightweight football. That was for some of the smaller players in the league. And I was playing on the lightweight team. And I normally wouldn't have even been in on that play. But on the first play of the game, one of our players got hurt on a kickoff. He got a concussion, and as a result, later in the game, I was put in to take his place on the kickoff squad. And I ran down, tackled the ball carrier, and when I did, I broke my neck and severely damaged my spine.
Oof.
I was instantly paralyzed as soon as I hit him.
Right then, and they knew it right then and there as well.
Well, I'm not sure if they exactly knew what the extent of my injury was,
Right.
but they knew it was severe. And, obviously they called for an ambulance and took me to the hospital. And there they did x rays and they saw how severe the damage really was.
So then you spend, the persistent determination, all those elements, family, and all the friends around you gave you the strength to go forward. You spent a lengthy amount of time in hospital. How long were you in hospital for?
I was in a few different hospitals and rehabilitation center for a total of 9 months and 20 days. And while I was there, it seemed like the medical profession had very limited expectations for what somebody with a spinal cord injury could do. And many of my fellow patients who had been injured longer than I was didn't seem to be doing much with their lives. And I think that was because nobody was really encouraging them or believed in them that there was still a lot they can do. I again was fortunate. My family was convinced there was a lot I could still do. And with their help and encouragement, I returned to Cornell 9 days after I got out of the hospital. Excuse me, 11 days after I got out of the hospital to resume my studies.
How did you get your mind? Because this is beyond imagination what I can even think of, that the one thing you knew for sure then, this would never change. It is not a question,
Right.
wait this long and it will all be back to wherever, right? So now you
Right.
have to reconcile in your mind, and even if you have all the support of all the people around you that love you, that care about you, and wants to be helpful, but you somehow had to reconcile in your mind, life will be different for you. And to then, after 11 days out of recovery, hospitals, and all the other things that they do, going back to university, which was a major, major step and gave you another very supportive environment for you to work with. But that period, how did you get mentally ready for it? Because in spite of all the things, all the support in that mind of you, you had to rethink everything in your life that
Right.
has happened,
Well,
that is happening, and even more importantly, what is happening next.
well, a few things went into play. I mean, first, I knew as a result of my physical limitations, in order for me to have any chance of being successful, I had to make the most of my mental abilities. And you have to understand that before my injury, I was a very motivated individual back then. I mean, you don't go to Cornell, one of the toughest schools in the country, study engineering, and play a sport at the same time without being very motivated.
Right.
I worked really hard to stay motivated following my injury. So when I went back to school, you asked how I was able to concentrate on my studies. One of the difficulties was that the school was not very accessible to somebody in a wheelchair. Every building had steps in front of it, and there was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus back then. So when I was sitting in my lectures, I was concentrating more on going up and down all those steps as opposed to what the professor was actually lecturing about.
And this was 1970, 71. That area then, nearly
Right,
30, 50 years ago, 50, 55 years ago, approaching that. So that was not even part of it. Looking at the sidewalks here, they didn't even have the ramp abilities there. And thinking about making access easier in a general sense, let alone in wheelchairs, was not even part of the what people even considered.
right. And that's one of the reasons why you didn't see a lot of people who used wheelchairs out in public places back then,
Right,
because very few facilities were accessible. So
right,
that made it extremely difficult for people to get out and get involved with society.
right.
And you particularly saw very few people that were quadriplegics, meaning paralyzed at the top of their body as well as their leg, out not only in public places, but you saw very few in institutions of higher learning. So there really weren't many people in college who were quadriplegics back then.
Right. So, but then you went beyond that. So you had engineering, you went back to Cornell, but then you continued from there on in to other areas that in other universities as you developed your skill sets even further than just
Right,
the engineering. So talk about
right.
that. What
Okay.
motivated you to go in those directions?
Well, I actually graduated with a degree in engineering in 1973.
Right.
Now, just to take you back to that time, this was well before the time of laptop computers. It was very difficult to gain access to anything like that back then. They weren't even invented. In fact, you didn't even have touch-tone phones. You had to do rotary phones.
I was going to
So,
say, I still remember my first cell phone was about this big, the size of
right,
my shoe, and so that's so we didn't have
right.
any.
Yeah. So with me, it was extremely difficult really to work as an engineer.
Right.
And I knew that what I really wanted to do was to devote my life and my career to helping others, particularly those who had either severe disabilities or were living with life altering diseases. I wanted to be able to provide them with better help, care, and support than I felt were available to me when I was undergoing my rehabilitation. So I changed my career goal and pursued a career in counseling to try and have hands on experience where I could sit with other people and try and provide them with help.
So that then became your destiny as you visualized it. So the the changing circumstances of losing control over most of your body then became the foundation really to make you look at what else can you do to help others.
Right. And because I couldn't really physically move, the one thing I could do was still talk.
Right.
So I wanted to make use of my speaking ability
In your brain.
to, right, to help others deal
Right.
with issues that they were facing and help them overcome their challenges.
Right.
So I pursued a career in counseling and I earned a degree in counseling at Cornell. But then to increase my counseling credentials, I went for a second master's degree, this one at Columbia University.
And when was that, Kenneth?
Well, I finished my degree at Columbia in 1976,
Right.
and I decided to look for a job in the rehabilitation counseling field.
Right.
And to my dismay, no one would hire me.
No.
I looked for a job for a year, sent out more than 200 resumes. And John, you have to understand in America, I had 2 degrees from Cornell and one from Columbia, 3 degrees from very prestigious Ivy League schools, 2 master's degrees, and everybody still felt I was too disabled to work.
They were not
So
ready for you.
right?
Yeah.
So I was fortunate that I found one organization here on Long Island willing to give me the opportunity to show what I can do. And that organization is Abilities Incorporated, which was a part of what was then called the Human Resources Center. It's now called the Viscardi Center after its founder, Dr. Henry Viscardi Jr. And they hired me to work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor where I was providing vocational and placement counseling to other individuals with disabilities.
Now, the other thing that happened, though, Ken, would be that not only did you pursue with determination to get the skill sets going beyond what had happened by getting the additional credentials, and then were hired by the foresight of one organization that gave you a chance, but the other part is technology changed. And as we became, now we are probably late 70s, early 80s, and computers became more accessible. We did have not iPhones necessarily, but a phone system where interacting became more easily done, and computers in particular started to still at the early stages of. I still have an old one, Apple, that I bought in early 1980. Hard to imagine, actually, but so technology became complementary to you, your skill sets that you developed, and then the limitations that you have physically were complemented by obviously a thoughtful organization that saw your abilities of some of the most credentials that you can possibly have, able body, but also if you were physically somewhat limited to others, but not mentally or speaking, that part became important with your credentials, and then technology and the foresight and more accessible has become your circumstances, but still even now has a long way to go, at least in my
Right.
observation. You got it in a long way, and you have been a big part of that, but there is still a distance to go. But the technology has advanced to, can you imagine there? You're sitting in New York, and I'm sitting in Central British Columbia. We have a discussion, virtual discussion on the internet as we speak. It feels to me like you're sitting with me here in the a room in
Right.
Central British Columbia on the other side of our continent, North American continent, and from one distance to the other, and we having a discussion about things that are very delicate, very difficult, very challenging, but also opportunity that hopefully will be an inspiration for others that watch our discussion, not only regionally, and that's the other part that I love about podcasting and about the internet, is that as we have this discussion, we already know, and I do a lot of presenting and speaking to groups of people, and it may be 100 to 500, 600, whatever they are. But in terms of the internet, as we have this discussion, we already know that tens of thousands, if not millions, of people will watch us around the globe. And hopefully, from that, and I'm sure they will, get an inspiration from what happened to you, but not only what happened, but what happened next in terms of mindset, physical limitations, but overriding it with determination, support that everything is possible under all circumstances.
Right. And unfortunately, back when I was hurt in the 70s, just because I had a physical injury and physical limitations, people often treated me as if I had an intellectual disability as well. People would come into the room and speak to the person next to me and ask them questions about me as if I couldn't speak for myself or couldn't think for myself. Fortunately, times have been changing and it's taken a while, but more and more people are recognizing that there's an awful lot people with disabilities can do, particularly in the workplace, where so many people now are recognizing that it just makes good business sense to hire somebody with a disability because they are some of the hardest working and most dedicated and loyal employees an employer can ever hope to have.
But in fairness, though, Ken, would it not also be an element of saying that I don't know what to say to this person because I recognize that they are different in terms of, but I don't know what to say to them. How do I interact with them rather than to now, obviously, more so that you, for all intents and purposes, are no different than I am or anybody else in interacting mentally, physically. You are no different than anybody else, other than with the circumstances of limitations that you have, but in likelihood that, as you already are an example, that in terms of mentally and the ability to study and to implement what you've learned, you're probably more skillful than most others, not the other way around. But in a lot of
Yeah,
cases, a lot of people are afraid. How do I
I
interact?
okay, let me comment a bit on that.
Yeah,
Firstly, as I indicated before, when I was injured, you didn't see many people with my type of disability out in public because the facilities were not accessible. Now, as more and more facilities have been made accessible, you get to interact more with people with disabilities. So there's not that fear of the unknown because now you can see people on a daily basis, and that can change people's attitude. But if I may say a little bit about myself to jump ahead, I later went to law school and became an assistant district attorney. And one of the things in my district attorney's office that personnel had people do is when you left the job, the assistant district attorneys would go through what's called an exit interview. And during the exit interview, you would tell the personnel manager what you like best about the job and what you think could be improved about the job. And on a number of occasions, I was told that the assistant district attorney said one of the best parts of their job was meeting, getting to know, and working with me. Now, I'm not saying that to boast or brag. What they were talking about was that unless they had a close relative with a disability, they never got to know or work with or see on a daily basis somebody with a disability. And they found it a revelation to them to basically see we're no different than they are in any way, shape, or form. And of course, one of the things they appreciated was that working with me did not mean additional work for them. They found that even though I had a severe disability, I was a hard worker who was able to carry my weight, both in the office and in the courtroom to do as much work, if not more, than my fellow assistant district attorney. And for many people, that became the best part of their job to associate, to, speak with, and work with on a daily basis someone with a disability.
yeah. And that, even from my experience, I have, in my daily life, we meet numerous people now that are interactive or proactive in businesses, even in our own business, actually, the have limitations that are, because of injuries or accidents that they have had, but still are equally, if not better than, and more committed than, and become an inspiration to others rather than, and as you said, in the early 70s, 80s, 90s, even, we still have more to go as far as I can see. And let's talk about that a little bit as you look forward. We saw that in what you related to in football, in terms of limiting you say in professional football, the does it also has it also been reduced the chance of injury in non-professional and in casual football to
Well,
avoid injuries?
they haven't changed the rules yet in, college or high school.
Right,
But, I'm sure they wanted to see how this new rule works out. And I'm sure anyway that people see they can reduce injuries and the risk of injuries,
right,
you know, more times will be followed by not just, other colleges, high schools, areas where they play football, but in other sports as well. They've
yeah,
improved some of the equipment, some of the coaching. They know more about the dangers of of spinal cord injuries and head injuries. And I think as a result, and sports going to be made a lot safer.
Yeah, and obviously being a Canadian, and but although we see it in the United States as well, you know, hockey is ice hockey is a bit of a rough sport, and you know, so but you know, it's a very popular sport, and obviously it's always one of the issues that they look at not only professionally but to limit injuries and but being rough is part of the sport in a way, you know. So the you know, but to prevent injuries, very important. But sports are becoming more and more popular, though, both for male and females, you know, and even professionally as we look around the world. You know, sport and sport on you know, looked at from a professional perspective is becoming increasingly more popular.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting to watch. It's exciting to play, but it's got to be done appropriately with safeguards. And people need to recognize that the dangers of head injuries, pose, such tremendous, um, tremendous difficulties for so many people to be faced with head injuries that affect them the rest of their lives. It's got to be made with safety in mind, everything that you do.
The other part, very important, is that in all those that have suffered injuries, they are not only physical ones, but also, you know, just giving you a little bit of background on myself. I was born in 1940, so I'm 84 years young, I like to say. And, you know, and it was during a difficult point, and I was born in northeastern Holland during the war years, and you know my mom and dad were married in 1938. They were in love, and my dad had a job, and they rented a beautiful house fairly quickly. Had two children, a boy and a girl, and you know, and then. You know, my mom was pregnant with me. My birthday is November the 1st, 1940. And then what happened is Adolf Hitler decided to invade Anna's country, Poland, in 1939. And then from there on in decided to invade and take over Western Europe. And so my dad was drafted into the Dutch army in April of 1940. And the last time that they heard from him is for 5 years. The last place that he was seen in the bombing of Rotterdam that killed thousands of people. And so it was my mom, still pregnant with me, then when they got invaded, and it was a boy and a girl going through the rest of the war on her own. And I then was born, and I still remember from the time that I was 3.5, 4 years old, that bombers overhead, hundreds of them, of the Allied forces, were bombing the German infrastructure in northwestern Germany, Bremen, Wilhelmshaven, Hamburg, all those places. And my mom would take us out at nights, standing on the flat roof behind our house, not because to look at things, but she feared less outside than she did inside. And in the distance, we saw those cities burning and the sky be red. But the sound of those hundreds of bombers is still with me even now. And then the 2004, you know, the Germans decided to cut off all the food supply to that part of Holland and Holland in general. And I still remember every morning we would go, My brother, 2 years older than me, and my sister, 1 year older than myself, is gunny sacks into the railroad yard to pick up anything edible and burnable. And the reason that we did as kids, they wouldn't shoot us, they would boot us one, but we'd be back the following day. And then the winter
Yeah.
of 1944
In
45 was the coldest on record, so and we saw far too much that we should not have seen during that period, and still the effect of PTSD, the inner child, all those things stayed with me, and so as it has with numerous other people.
Yeah, I know it's really difficult. So many people and so many veterans still suffer from that.
Yes. And then the other part that happened there is that on April the 12th, 1945, we were, April the 12th, 1945, we were liberated by the Canadian Army as part of the Allied forces that landed in Normandy in the summer of 1944. And they pushed their way through France, Belgium, and through northern Holland. And so they liberated the northeastern part of Holland, where we were 10 minutes from the German border. They had made such an impression on me that I always knew from that point forward I would go. My dream was to go to the land of my heroes, Canada, and I did that when I was 23. And then the other dream that I had is to build a lumber mill, and I did that in northern BC. And so the point that I was trying to make is this one, Ken, is that we saw far too much that we should not have seen, that still is with me now, even 80 years later, and still now. And then at the same time, how fortunate we are in North America, both Canada and the United States, that in the countries that we live and with all the opportunities that we have, and then look, as in Anna and her family and her history, we look at the Ukraine, and we look at the Middle East, we look at Venezuela, we look at Cuba, we look at China, we look at Russia. How fortunate, how lucky we are to live in North America.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
And so I feel in a different way than you are, that the experience that I had have become a foundation for me and the rest of my life in terms of communicating about it and appreciating it, but also to be an inspiration for others and saying how fortunate we are and what else can we do. Is that the foundation for me is attitude, and I avoid negative. I always have, I still do now, and I've always in all circumstances been like that. Passion, whatever I do, I give it 125% in all the things that I do. In work ethic, I work harder than anybody. I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late. And even now at 84, I still work probably 60 hours a week. And I look forward to what else can I do. And then the other part that I see in your bio is that giving back to others and to the community has always been important to me, and I do that even here in Canada, and have in the region that I live in now, northern British Columbia, done for the last 60 years. But also, that's one of the reasons that I do the podcasting that I do, and I'm very active in it, as you are, and write books about it and speak about it, and first and foremost, appreciating as to what do we have and what can we do to give back and share with others, so it may then give them inspiration that everything under all circumstances is possible.
Absolutely. And John, I think what you're saying is so important for so many people to hear. It's important for people to have role models that they could look to for inspiration and motivation. You're certainly one of those role models, and more people need to hear stories such as yours to encourage them that there's an awful lot they can still do with their lives.
And the same applies to you, Ken. And as I said, that as we sit here and we podcast around the world, because that's, and I'm not bragging about it, but we have probably 700,000, I think, subscribers on YouTube, and several million people from around the world that are watching our podcast. For me, it's not, what can I do? Can I make money at it? Or do it's not about that. For me, it's that how to get the story out and the inspiration, not only my own, but people like you and others that I podcast on my podcast. And that's why I do so much of it. That's why I write books about it, not to make money. I'm okay with the things that I do. Money to me is not important. And I just have to have enough to live on. But I write the books. I've done 4 or 5 now, and to me, those are stories that I'm telling. I'm a storyteller. That's what I do in my books, and so and with the whole objective being precisely what you said, is that only not only mine, but to interact with people like you and others like you that are an inspiration potentially to those people, even in those challenging countries, maybe South America, maybe Eastern Europe or European period, of people globally that do not give up. Everything is possible, but lay down the foundation of what, in my case, is, and you have your own as well that are an inspiration: attitude, passion, work ethic. What will follow is success.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And unfortunately, when I was injured, there weren't very many role models that I could look to for help or inspiration. I mean, Christopher Reeve certainly became one of those role models, but
Yes.
he wasn't injured till about 25 years after my injury. So before that, there weren't very many people that I could look to say, you know what, there's still a lot you can do with this type of adversity or injury. And it helps people to know
Is
that,
it not the other way around, Ken? That it's not a question of what you can do. It is not a question of what you cannot do. There is not much that you cannot do, rather than the other
absolutely.
way around.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, my feeling is, something's only impossible until it's done. And then it's no longer impossible.
Exactly.
And, nobody should fear the impossible. I mean, I know there's a saying in the military that says, the difficult we do at once, the impossible takes a little longer.
I
Well,
agree with that.
sometimes it takes a little longer, but it's still doable.
Yeah. So you wrote a book about this as well, correct?
Right. I
Eh,
have a book out now. It's called I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken story.
So
And
has Anna got a copy of that book there that we can hold in front of?
what I pulled it up. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
because I see it. Yeah, that's so. So shared with our. So that is available on all the different areas, right?
Right. They could go to my website, which is kenkunken.com, and they can see all the different ways it could be purchased. And I actually just recorded an audio version of my book that is coming out tonight. So that'll be
I
available as well.
I love that. And now, so Scott, where are my books? Scott is supposed to have my books laying here. He forgot to do that today, but he will get them for me because I want to share with you the. Have you got my other book, ADHD? The one that I picked up. Sorry about that, walking in front of the camera here. So the other part that I was going to quickly share with you is that these are some of the ones that I'm doing. The first one that I did is Against All Odds, and yeah, writing books is not easy, so people have said to me, "Oh, you had such an interesting life. Should I write a book about it?" So for 20 years, I've been trying to start, but then I'm 84. If I, so about 5 years ago, if I don't do it now, it will never happen. So this book here took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And it's not about how successful John is. It's not about that, in spite of it all. And then the other part that I want to just share with you that you may find interesting is that I was academically not a success story. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. So they said, "What are we going to do with this guy?" To my parents, and I love my parents. They were always very supportive. And so some people said, "Send him to the mentally challenged school." And they said, "No, we're not going to do that." So, and then they said, my dad was in lumber and my grandfather was a master carpenter. So I like lumber, saying, well, maybe make him a furniture maker. And so they send me at 12 and a half years old to a furniture factory. And so that's where I worked. And in the evenings, I would go to become a furniture maker. And so, and then when I had the dream of going to the land of my heroes, I wanted to prove that, at least to me, that all the friends that I had at 12 and a half years old that went to college and university, I became a laborer. I'm proud of that today, but then it was kind of looked down on. But I was always the optimist in spite of it. I lived in my own world. But I was always wondering, why am I different? And I felt I had to go remove myself, start with nothing, had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and went to Western Canada because that's where all the timber is. And I wanted to prove to me that I could start with nothing, couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job, and I'm going to build a lumber mill. And so I went to Vancouver, came off the train and went to the immigration office. I couldn't speak English, but fortunately there was a German fellow. I told him what I wanted to do. He said, "Go to Prince George. That's where they're building sawmills and blah, blah, blah." I did that. I went to Prince George on the Greyhound. It took about 12 hours, and I can still see the bus station where it was here from my studio window. And I had my suitcase, 2 books, 3 sets of clothes, and couldn't speak the language, didn't have a job, didn't know a soul. But I counted my money at least 3 times. I had exactly $25.47. But what I had, as I said earlier, passion, that I will always avoid the negative. No matter how tough today is, it will be a better day tomorrow. Attitude, passion, whatever I do, I give it 125%, and work ethic. And I did all of that, and I stayed here now 60 years ago. I done all of the other things. But the one thing that changed me, in a way, I never quite could figure out, why am I different? And so at one point, I walked into a bookstore here after I was here already for 32 years. I was already successful in business and had a number of different companies. And everybody said, "Oh, you're so successful, blah, blah, blah." I didn't feel that way. And then I picked up a book, Ken, that changed my life. And the book's title was Driven to Distraction, written by Dr. Hollowell, medical doctor, professor, Dr. Hollowell. And the book was about ADHD. I never even heard of it, ever. And so I said, "Oh my God, that's me." And so I wrote in the book in Dutch, because I was ashamed of it. It was implied that it was a mental deficiency of some sort. That in Dutch I wrote, "Now I finally know who I am." And this is the actual book that I picked up then in January of 1997. And it took me 5 years before I would go to my doc here, after I read about it, studied it, looked at Google and all the other things, but still was ashamed. I went to my doc, and it was a personal friend, delivered our 2 daughters, and he said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we checked it out, and I do. I call it now a superpower. And a lot of people say to me, how can you do all the things that you do? You got 10 different companies, you have 5 books that you wrote, and you do podcasting. How do you do it all? I say ADHD, that's how I do it. And, and so I wrote a book. I felt there were so many people, and this comes to the issue that you have raised, and it became a foundation of your life in terms of sharing with others. Everything is possible. And I felt that ADHD was not understood well, frequency of occurrence much higher than most people have anticipated. I believe it is as high as 25 to 30% of the population, male and female. And so the other thing that I did is, you're my podcast number 363. Now, for those people that are watching us and thinking about ADHD, is that I interviewed Dr. Hollywell on podcast number 203 on the Brink. And Dr. Hollywell, ADHD and has dyslexia, so do I. And it was an immensely interesting interview that I did with him podcasting. After all that time, he wrote 18 books and did the audible on them as well. And so do I. Although it's not easy for me, but I did the audible on all of my books. And then the last one that I did is that living young, dying old. And that's a picture of me. Actually, I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. And again, saying that everything is possible. And so it became then an inspiration for me to not speak a lot about ADHD, but I included in a lot of discussions that I have. And I did a presentation to about 150 people or so. And so that it was about entrepreneurship or something, but I always include a piece of ADHD in there and tell them about, I failed grade 3 and grade 7. And I don't know anybody that failed grade 3. And way in the back was a lady that said, I failed grade 3. I said, well, just the two of us then. But by the time I'm done in my presentation, a lot of people are sitting in the room and say, darn, I wish I had it too. So I just wanted to share that part with you about you being an inspiration. I at least hope I will be for others around the world, and the internet and podcasting gives us that ability because we already know it is exploding. It is the new media of the future around the world.
I agree, and it's great to have that platform to get your message out, so that other people can benefit by it. I mean, the more people that hear you speak and hear what you're doing will encourage them to do more with their lives. What you're doing is helping so many others deal not only with their disability, but any adversity that they're facing. And one of the things I found in my life that has helped me and made me feel better about myself is knowing that now I'm in a position to help others. And when you help others, you help not only the other people you are trying to help, you're doing a lot for yourself as well, and
Exactly.
making yourself feel better and giving yourself a reason to go forward and work even harder to serve the community, to help your friends, to help your family, and to help as many individuals as you can.
And that brings us to, at least for me, and I'm sure it does for you, is say, what's really the purpose of us in this life? And me at 84, and tongue in cheek, I say I'm going to get to, I'm 120. So, but whatever I can do, it's not important for me, money and all those things, but to family, very, very important, very critical, as it is for me and you. And then what I can give back to others from my experience, and to hopefully give them the inspiration when it looks like, with all the adversity that you had, I had, I'm talking about me, and you as well, is that how can you make all this happen? I say, believe everything is possible, but it starts up here. You have to be the one that says, I can do it, it can be done.
Absolutely. And that's why I really am proud of the title of my book. I Just to tell you how I got that title.
Yeah,
6 months after my injury, I testified before a United States Senate Health Subcommittee chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. And 8 days after my testimony, Senator Kennedy sent me a glass paperweight in the mail that had an inscription on it that the senator said his late brother Robert Kennedy liked very much. And those words on that inscription have always been so meaningful. The inscription read, "Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not." And that
exactly.
means so much to me. And
Exactly.
I just think that those words can inspire and motivate so many people.
Give us once more your website. So, how can people contact you? Your book is there available, audible, as well as in hard form on any other major media.
Okay, well, my website is kenkunken.com. It's my name, kenkunken.com. And that'll indicate, where my book can be purchased. And right now it's out in hardcover as well as an ebook form, a Kindle form. And starting tonight will be available on audiobook. And what I most want to see is that if my book, by hearing my story, will help motivate and inspire others to do more with their lives, that's the reason for my book. And right now, my biggest motivation are my wife and my three sons because they motivate me to try and be a better person and work as hard as I possibly can to make their lives better so that they can then go on and help other people.
I love it, Ken. And then for all those people watching us from around the world, and so watch our podcast and recognize it and inspire it, and then share it with others and like it, and so that other ones will follow us as well, and we do more of these podcasts and many many others, both on your channel and my own. This podcast will be available to you at the end of today. So we don't wait very long. We put it out there very, very quickly, available to you and all the people from around the world that you communicate with as well. So it was an absolute privilege and a pleasure to have you on my podcast, Ken. I enjoyed meeting your family, including Anne around the corner. Hey, look at us,
Hey,
Anne.
I think I wanted to type. Come on.
And nice
Thanks.
meeting you, and it was a pleasure. And let's make sure we stay in touch, Ken.
That would be great. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to tell a little bit about my story and getting to meet you as well. I appreciate that.
It was amazing, Ken. And again, all the best to you and your family. And let's make sure we stay in touch.
Great. To you as well. Thank you.
Take care.